And welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around we've got 3 movies for you. 2 of them are very recent, one of them's kind of sort of a bit recent, but all of them are minor films, kind of, which are interesting. So let's start with a movie from 2022 which was made during the pandemic, and it has the same writer as Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, but we'll forgive him that. The writer in question is a guy called David Cope, and the movie is called Kimi, and it's directed by none other than Steven Soderbergh. Ocean's 11, all those other cool movies, Sex, Lies and Videotape. So Soderbergh made a movie during the pandemic, and it was about the pandemic, it was about lockdowns, it was also about technology, and it's an homage to Rear Window, the Alfred Hitchcock movie from the 1950s, the one with Grace Kelly and Thelma Ritter and James Stewart and Raymond Burr. It's Rear Window meets Blowout for the pandemic generation. Low budget, it cost about $20 million to make, but it's a solid little thriller. In it, Zoe Kravitz plays a woman called Angela who has suffered an assault in the past. So she has anxiety issues, she has agoraphobia, and she's working for a startup company called Amygdala, which has created a digital speaker called Kimi, which is intended as a rival for Siri and Alexa and Google. So the startup's going well, and the initial public offering is about a week away. Angela works as what's called a voice stream interpreter. When the smart speakers can't understand something, it gets sent to her in a list. She listens to the request that the customer is making. So Angela writes a line of code explaining whatever the customer has said to the algorithm. She previously worked as a Facebook moderator, but is now working for this startup. And she's good at her job. She's smart, she's quick, she's tech-oriented. She knows how to use not only computer systems, but also audio equipment and all sorts of machinery. So she's a well-grounded person. She takes medication for her anxiety. She exercises on a Peloton bike and stays fit. And she has an agreement with a guy living across the street in another loft for occasional friend with benefit meetups. Then one day, Angela hears a data stream from one of the smart speakers, one of the Kimi smart speakers, which suggests to her that a woman is being assaulted or possibly killed. There's a lot of noise in the voice recording, so she gets out an audio mixer she's got in her storage room, hooks it all up, cleans up the audio, and hears what's going on. She immediately informs her supervisor and says that they've got to call the police and they've got to call corporate. And for some reason, there's some blockage in the corporation because the initial public offering is going out in a week, and they don't want any kind of scandal or any association with their product with criminal activity. But there's something Angela doesn't know, and that something leads her into a lot of peril. In spite of her agoraphobia, she's asked to come in and meet somebody from corporate, who's played by Rita Wilson. There's some things that Angela finds out. First off, she finds out that HR has more information than they should have about her, including a retinal scan and also knowledge of her medical conditions which aren't part of what they should be doing. This gets waved off by corporate, and she's asked to wait in a room while they track things down, and she keeps telling them, you've got to contact the FBI, there's something serious going on here. A woman's life has either been ended or in peril. Then suddenly she looks down the corridor and 2 men are marching up the corridor towards her. And what she doesn't know is that somebody high in the company is the male voice on that recording. And so she ends up running out of the building and dealing with all of these anxieties and fears and really extreme anxiety and really extreme agoraphobia. She has to get back home across the city while being chased by a small black ops team that person has hired to get all of the copies of the recording and to stop her talking about it. This is Soderbergh. Soderbergh is really great at this kind of ramping up the tensions thriller, and he does a really good job in this one. For $20 million, this movie is really good. Zoe Kravitz is really good as Angela, and the emotional arcs of her character. And there's a nice rapport between her and her friend across the street, played by Byron Bowers. There's also another person who lives on the street and looks out the windows, because this is during pandemic lockdowns. Everyone's wearing masks. People aren't going out as much as they did. And the weird thing about that is that person who's also across the street and who plays into the drama and plays into the action is played by an actor called Devin Rattray, who ended up being arrested after the film came out for some things similar to the MacGuffin in this particular movie, and he's since gone to jail. So reality and fiction mix in that one, but I won't go any further into that. It's not what I'm here to talk about. I like the look of the film too. It's got a very smart but very fragile protagonist. The technology is used really well too. The Kimi speaker plays into the resolution of the plot when the Black Ops team reaches her apartment in some really interesting ways. And Angela's knowledge of how machinery works also plays into it. Every little bit where you think something's coming out of left field and hasn't been mentioned before is actually been mentioned before. There's a lot of Chekhov's guns in this movie that you don't know are guns when you see them first, but when the action leads you into a certain location, you go, I know what they're doing now. It's a beautifully written script. It's well acted. The action is really tense. And people have complained about the movie in some way, saying somebody with that kind of job wouldn't have that big an apartment and nitpicking all of that away. I think it's a fine small movie and a fine small action film. Action films don't have to be the moon colliding with the earth or somebody snapping their fingers and half of the universe goes away. Action films don't have to be that. Having that small scale action film which knowledgeably references previous films like Rear Window and Blowout can work really well, and I think Soderbergh does a nice job of this. It's a definite hidden gem from 2022. It came out on streaming services because it's not the sort of film that in the modern environment would come out in a cinema. But if you can find a copy of Kimi, you should really watch it, or if you can find it on a streaming service, you should really watch it. It's a tight little thriller. Got a good audience reaction as well. It does pretty well on Rotten Tomatoes. And it's one of my favourite, I wasn't expecting much of this film, but it's better than I thought it was kind of films for 2023. And you should check that one out. It's got a lot going for it. Second one I got for you is a superhero movie. You know, I've been following all the superhero movies, and I'm kind of interested in the way the superhero franchises in particular are having their ups and downs. They've been changed by the pandemic. They've been changed by audiences saying they're burned out on superhero movies when what they actually mean is they're burned out with the same kind of story being told every time in a superhero movie. And so I went down to my local cinema with the reclining seats and saw Blue Beetle, directed by Angel Manuel Soto. It's a good, small-scale superhero movie. Budget was only $104 million, so that's like less than half of the budget of a major Marvel film or a major DC film. It hasn't made a profit yet. It's much better than a lot of these films that are coming out, even though it does tread a fairly familiar path, being a superhero origin story. Zola Maridueña plays Jaime Reyes, a university graduate. He's got a pre-law degree, who's trying to get a job in the big city across the bay where all the high-tech, beautiful people live and Cord Corporation runs things. He ends up getting a job cleaning a house for a billionaire, Victoria Cord, played by Susan Sarandon. He works there with his sister Milagro, played by Belissa Escobedo, and she gets him sacked from the job. But at the time he gets sacked, he meets Jennifer Cord, the niece of Victoria Cord, who runs the Cord Corporation, played by Burra Makozine, and there's a little bit of rapport between them. She says she can get him a job. He goes the next day to meet her at her office, not knowing that Jennifer stole an alien artifact that her aunt has found, which the aunt wants to use on a cyborg project she's got going for the corporation called OMAC, One Man Army Corps. Now, OMAC goes back in DC as far back as Jack Kirby in the 1970s. The original OMAC was totally different than the retcon OMAC. Basically what it is it's an exoskeleton cyborg thing to make super soldiers. That's all you need to know for that part. So in order to escape with the artifact, Jennifer gives it to Jaime to look after, and the artifact, a blue scarab, attaches itself to Jaime and integrates into his body as a kind of symbiont, a little bit like a Guyver, and he becomes a superhero called the Blue Beetle, almost against his wishes. Now, his extended family find out about this immediately. There's no secret identity stuff here, and he's got a pretty cool family. His grandmother, played by Adriana Barraza, has some secrets about her which are very, very cool. His father, Alberto, is played by Damien Alcazar, who's a really fine actor. Every actor in this movie, with the possible exception of Susan Sarandon, brings a grounded A game to this film. It's got some really fine character acting in it. His uncle Rudy's interesting too. He's played by George Lopez, and he's described in the movie as being a Mexican Doc Brown. He's a tech wizard, and he builds some interesting machinery and uses some interesting technology that the Cord Corporation has as well. And he's an unashamed lefty. He's an anti-corporate guy who wears his heart on his sleeve and doesn't take shit from rich people, which is very fun. And George Lopez does a really great job of that. When you got bad guys in any kind of action film or superhero movie, you got two kinds of bad guys. You got the boss, in this case Susan Sarandon's Victoria Cord, and then you've got the muscle. In this case, the muscle is a guy called Carpax, played by Raul Max Trujillo, who has an early version of the OMAC cyborg equipment attached to him. This movie does some really interesting things. For a start, the family is really tight, and the family goes through a whole bunch of stuff, and the family helps Jaime to defeat the bad guys. It's not just him going up against things while everybody else runs away and screams. There's a cohesive family unit, and there's a moral compass about the family, and there's a groundedness to the family dynamic based on Mexican culture, which really works well. It makes you empathize with the characters. And the other thing the movie does brilliantly is Carpax is more complex than he would be in a normal run-of-the-mill by-the-book superhero narrative. And Jaime finds that out during the boss battle at the end between Carpax and the Blue Beetle. Now, James Gunn has said that Blue Beetle is going to be part of the DCEU in the future, which is cool. I like the character. I think having a young person who's not just another white guy called Chris is great. I think that Zola Mariduena has a great career ahead of him. He's charismatic, he's good looking, he hits all of the character beats perfectly in this film. Special effects are much better than they are in The Flash, for instance, but then that's not difficult. And they're used as sparingly as possible. There are some practical effects along with the computer effects that work really well. And even though this is a plot we've seen before, the character stuff takes it off to one side. It's not straight down the line. You could say that the plot almost parallels Iron Man in a lot of ways, the original Iron Man from 2008. But the character beats and the cultural beats that we get in this film make it different. And I'm there for that. I want to hear other people's stories, even if they are within a framework with which I'm very familiar. And I really enjoyed Blue Beetle. I think it worked. I didn't go into it with high expectations, and it way exceeded the expectations I had. I want to see more of the character, and I want to see more superhero movies like this. I think that the cultural background of Jaime is important. I think representation is important, and even if that isn't important to you, the story carries you along. It's well directed, it's well written, it's well acted. The special effects support the story rather than intrude into it, and I enjoyed the hell out of it when I saw it. I saw two movies in the same day. I saw this one and the third Hercule Poirot movie with Kenneth Branagh on the same day, and I enjoyed them equally. It's a recommendation from me. That one you should see. The third movie is a bit of an outlier, a bit of a weirdie. It comes from a Skid Row studio called The Asylum. It's from 2015 and it's called Flight 1942, also known as Flight World War II. I found this on Tubi and I thought I'd give it a go because I didn't want to watch anything better and I was getting late at night. I just wanted something to see me through to bedtime. It's kind of good. The concept is high concept for a movie by The Asylum. A small modern passenger jet travels through a time warp and ends up in 1942 over Europe. That's your elevator pitch for the movie. So it's fairly simple because you need one set and maybe a bit more, which is the aeroplane. You need a whole bunch of actors to play the different roles. There are some soldiers on the plane. There's a macho kind of men's rights nutcase. There are some very resourceful female flight attendants. And there's the captain of the flight, Captain Strong, played by Farhan Tahir. Farhan Tahir is the guy who captured Tony Stark in the first Iron Man movie, the bald guy who runs for the 10 Rings and puts him in the cave where he builds the first Iron Man suit, that guy. And Farhan Tahir does a great job of playing the captain. They suddenly travel into 1942. They're in the middle of a bombing raid over Europe, with the Allies bombing Germany and occupied France. The only thing they can get is like radio signals. And they find out some really interesting things. They find out that the universe they've been thrown into is not their one. The history is slightly different. And the divergence in history is earlier than they thought, which makes it really interesting. I'm not going to do a spoiler on that because I want you to watch the movie. Again, keep your expectations kind of low. Don't expect it to be wonderful, but it's good. It's solid. The acting, particularly for Farhan Tahir, is good. The acting by some of the smaller roles are great. They do make contact eventually with some people on the ground, and they find a technology on board the plane which will help with the Allies' effort against the Nazis. And they find a way to manage to get that technology to the people on the ground. it's a really odd film in that it was probably pitched to have a much larger budget, and so they had to cut things back and trim things and simplify things to get this movie made on an asylum kind of budget, which would only have been a few $1 million. But it's engaging and it works. It's got a little Twilight Zone-y kind of bit at the end, which is a bit superfluous, really. And nonetheless, it punches well above its weight for an asylum movie in that it's got a good premise, it's got solid acting, it's got a plot that throws a few twists at us at unexpected moments in ways that aren't the usual cookie cutter stuff you get from the asylum. And Flight World War II, also known as Flight 1942, if you can find it on Tubi or some other cheapo way of getting it, it may even be on YouTube for all I know. In fact, I think it is. I think I did spot one on YouTube. You should watch this one. It doesn't outstay its welcome. It's 1 hour and 25 minutes, so it's an 85-minute movie. It delighted me much more than I thought it would. I knew nothing about it. It was one of those things. I was scrolling past Rowan and Martin's Laughing on Tubi, and I saw this thing come up, and I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And I did, and I was rewarded. So Flight World War II, also known as Flight 1942, is a little bit of a hidden gem recommendation. Keep your expectations low. Let the twists and turns happen. It's got more about it than I ever expected it to have. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and leave a comment. Hit the notification bell. Leave me an emoji if you can't think of anything to say. You can also support the channel by becoming a channel member, or else you can donate at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Got more things coming up. Wednesday's video is going to be a lot of fun because I look at a trilogy of recent movies that I found interesting. And until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch some 10 o'clock at night movies when you're scrolling through a whole bunch of screens on a free streaming service that you might not try otherwise, but you're bound to enjoy. And I'll catch you next time.